Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're stepping away from the usual numbers and trends. Instead, we are performing a bit of surgical science, you could say.
Right.
We're focusing on one single, absolutely dazzling specimen, the Ramirezi Cichlid, Mikrogeophagus ramirezi. This whole deep dive is about biology and about solving a puzzle that's, well, it's frustrated fish keepers for years.
It really has. It's a perfect example of a huge mystery hiding in a very tiny creature. For anyone who's serious about specialized fish keeping, the Ramirezi is a true crown jewel.
Famous for its beauty.
But infamous for the challenge. And the sources we're looking at today, they really distilled this long quest. It goes back to the author's earlier work. They reference it as part 130. To just reliably figure out the gender of these fish.
And that identification, it's not just for academic curiosity, right?
Yeah.
The whole point of gaining this knowledge was to form a successful breeding pair.
Exactly.
Without knowing male from female, it's a total shot in the dark. It just leads to years of failure and frustration.
But the source material, it seems they finally cracked the code. They identified one definitive visual hue, and they did it by observing a known, guaranteed breeding pair.
So a controlled experiment, basically. In a fish store.
Basically, yeah. It gave them the comparative data they needed to separate, fact from all the fish-keeping folklore out there. That said, before we get to the big reveal, we have to start with the most critical piece of context.
Right. The absolute non-negotiable caveat. Because if you're listening to this hoping to, run out and apply this knowledge, you have to understand the incredibly high bar for just keeping these fish alive, let alone breeding them.
They are, and I really can't stress this enough, the definition of a delicate species. They are just completely unforgiving about their water parameters.
So pristine conditions.
Pristine. You need robust filtration that can keep ammonia and critically nitrate levels at an absolute bare minimum.
Okay, let's unpack that phrase, absolute bare minimum, because this is where the real expertise comes in. Most fish that people keep, they can tolerate some nitrates, right? Maybe up to 20 parts per million.
Sure, yeah. Many can. But with the Ramirezi, we're talking about near zero nitrates. The sources are clear that even tiny fluctuations or sustained low levels that other tropical fish would just shrug off.
It would be a huge problem for these guys.
It would cause stress, immune suppression, and a really rapid decline. To get those levels, you're moving beyond just a simple filter. We're talking about advanced water management.
Like reverse osmosis water.
Reverse osmosis, daily small water changes, very densely planted tanks to act as biological nitrate sponges.
It sounds like a full-time commitment, and that brings us to the author's sort of internal conflict. They solve this incredible biological puzzle.
Yeah.
And then immediately have to face the reality of the fish's needs versus their own fish-keeping philosophy.
Exactly right. The author explicitly says that the meticulous, super-intensive maintenance needed for Ramirezi runs completely counter to their preferred style.
Which they describe as?
Minimal maintenance and a naturalistic approach.
So we should probably clarify what that means, a naturalistic approach in this context.
It's a philosophy where you're trying to create a stable, more or less self-regulating ecosystem. So you're thinking heavily planted tanks, diverse microbial life, stable substrates.
And you're letting the system handle its own biological load.
Right. You minimize the need for constant human intervention, like daily testing or huge weekly water changes. The goal is ecosystem balance over, active chemical management.
And the Ramirezi just fundamentally disrupts that because it requires a level of intervention that is the opposite of minimal.
You can't just rely on an established ecosystem to keep nitrates at near zero, not without constant help. So the knowledge was acquired, the riddle was solved.
But the application was postponed.
Correct. The author chose the health and stability of their preferred ecosystems over the desire to keep this one stunning but notoriously challenging species.
It's a very pragmatic decision. It shows that understanding the fish's needs is just as important as knowing how to sex it.
That's a great way to put it. Knowledge doesn't automatically mean you should act on it.
But for those who are ready for that challenge, let's get into the technical breakthrough. They needed a framework, right, to compare the male and female.
They needed to filter out all the noise. And the analysis was, interestingly, aided by an AI-generated comparison table.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it helped organize and cross-reference the visual data from that confirmed breeding pair. And that really focused the search on what they called the most striking and reliable visual cues.
That's a very modern way to do it, using AI to synthesize observational data that for years was just anecdotal and confusing.
Totally. Because for decades, hobbyists even pros, they relied on cues that are highly subjective. And the first thing the source material does is clarify which of those commonly cited indicators are actually, well, unreliable.
Okay, so what are the red herrings? What should we immediately discard?
The main culprits are the black side spot, its presence, its saturation, and most often just the overall coloration, the vibrancy of the fish.
But that's what everyone looks for first.
It is, and they are the least reliable things to look at.
So wait, if the males are supposed to be brighter to attract mates, why does relying on hue just fall apart when you try to do it reliably?
This is where it gets really interesting, because the behavioral and genetic context is crucial here. Color in cichlids, it's not a static trait, it's incredibly dynamic.
So if I see a dull-looking fish, I might just assume it's a female. But what the source is saying is that I could be wrong a lot of the time.
A good portion of the time, precisely. Color variation is driven by a few things. First, just mood and stress. A male that's stressed from being transported or from bad water, or just his position in the tank hierarchy, he might show extremely pale colors.
Making him look like a submissive female?
Exactly. And a dominant female might even look brighter than a submissive or sick male.
Okay, so that's one factor.
Second, the lighting in the tank dramatically affects how we perceive color. A fish that looks dull under a normal light might just pop under a different kind of bulb, which completely skews your assessment.
Right.
And third, the most frustrating factor is just genetics. The source notes that some male lines, maybe from years of captive breeding, they just naturally have paler colorations.
Regardless of health or mood.
Right. You could have a perfectly healthy, genetically sound male breeder who is just deceptively pale.
So relying on color is basically a gamble. You're building a breeding program on something that's fleeting, temporary, or variable. We need something permanent.
You need hard morphology.
Something that stays put.
And that's the pivot. After getting rid of all the subjective conditional cues, the focus shifted to the physical structure of the fish, specifically the dorsal fin. And this structure, this is what finally gave them that aha.
Okay, let's nail this down. If I'm looking at a tank of Ramirezi and I want to definitively identify a male, I need to ignore the color and look at the dorsal fin. What am I looking for?
You are looking at the very front section of that dorsal fin, specifically the first or second hard rays.
Let's just pause there for a second. Hard ray, that's a technical term.
It is. So a fish's fins are supported by these things called rays. You have soft rays, which are flexible, and then you have hard rays. Sometimes people call them spines, which are rigid, unsegmented, and bony.
They provide structure?
Structure and defense, yeah. And the key here is that because they're bone, they don't change based on mood or lighting. They are permanent structural markers.
So what does the male Ramirezi do with those hard rays that the female doesn't?
The male has this one. Highly specific, easy to see difference. Those first or second hard rays on his dorsal fin are noticeably longer and more pointed. They extend well past the rest of the fin.
Okay, so like a little flag or a spike.
Almost exactly like that, yeah. A little forward projecting spike coming off the very front of the dorsal fin.
That makes perfect sense. So the female's dorsal fin is more uniform, maybe gently rounded, while the male has that single distinguishing elongated feature.
It is the single most valuable indicator, the non-negotiable trait. By focusing on this one structural element, which is immutable, doesn't care about stress or genetics, the mystery was settled. This is what allows you to reliably form breeding pairs. It just cuts through all the noise.
That level of specificity is genuinely exciting, especially for anyone who's been frustrated by this before. It turns a guessing game into, well, an objective checklist.
It does.
Okay.
And the journey to get there was clearly exhaustive. And that leads to this final kind of beautiful reflection from the source material. The author noted that even though they chose not to keep Ramirezi right away,
because of that conflict with their maintenance style.
Right. Even so, the acquisition of this knowledge, that in itself was deeply rewarding.
It speaks to that, universal joy of discovery. The value isn't just in what you do with the knowledge, but in the process of moving from confusion to clarity.
They hold the key now, whether they use it tomorrow or 10 years from now.
Right.
The author phrased it perfectly. They said, the journey to solve a mystery is often as rewarding as the solution itself. They successfully used observation, data, modern tools, all to confirm a biological signature that was hiding in plain sight.
And for you, the learner, that means you now possess that same key. If you ever walk past a tank of stunning Mikrogeophagus Ramirezi, you know exactly where to look, not at the flashy colors,
but at the structure. You're looking for those first few bony pointed rays that act as the male's signature. That knowledge is the distilled payoff of this entire deep dive.
Okay, let's wrap this up with the single most crucial takeaway for identifying Ramirezi gender. You have to look past the misleading cues like color and spot size.
Mm-hmm.
To find the male, you check the dorsal fin for the noticeably longer and pointed first or second hard rays. That is the reliable structural difference.
Absolutely. And this whole deep dive really underscores a fascinating conflict, doesn't it? We saw the source author get this incredible, precise technical knowledge, only to decide not to use it because of the species' practical demands.
Yeah.
And that raises a really important question for you to consider based on how the source prioritized their philosophy. Given the meticulous upkeep this sensitive fish requires demanding near zero nitrate water, does having the technical knowledge, the definitive gender ID, actually change the practical calculus of whether you should try to keep them? Does knowing the solution make the difficulty of the challenge more or maybe less compelling?